Imagine you're walking down Nez Mihajlova, the main pedestrian street in Belgrade. To your left, you've got a slick, newly opened European luxury boutique. To your right, a group of Russian expats are paying for overpriced espressos with tech bro money. Overhead, a drone is mapping out a new highway funded entirely by Chinese loans. And right beneath your feet, this soil is sitting on one of the most highly contested, geopolitically explosive lithium deposits on the entire planet. Welcome to the Republic of Serbia in 2026. If you listen to the government's PR machine, Serbia is in the middle of a golden age. They'll proudly point to the fact that their nominal GDP just crossed the $112 billion mark, and they are gearing up to host EXPO 2027, pouring billions into a futuristic leap into the future infrastructure program. But if you listen to the locals sitting in the kafanas, it's a completely different story. They'll tell you about a demographic time bomb where the population is shrinking so fast it looks like a localized Thanos snap. They'll tell you about sticky inflation hovering around 4.5% that makes buying groceries feel like a luxury, and a youth unemployment rate sitting at a brutal 23.3%. So, who is lying? The answer is neither of them, and that's what makes this country so damn fascinating. Today, we are tearing down the hype, ignoring the political propaganda from both sides, and looking straight at the raw, verifiable numbers. We're going to explore how Serbia has turned its economy into the ultimate geopolitical poker game, balancing the EU, China, the US, and Russia. We'll look at why the government pays foreign corporations massive subsidies just to exploit their own cheap labour, how a single lithium mine almost brought down the government, and why Serbia's tech sector is quietly becoming a powerhouse while its agricultural sector dries up. This isn't just a video about spreadsheets and GDP charts. This is a masterclass in how a developing European nation tries to hustle its way to the top of the global supply chain and the dark, hidden costs of doing so. Let's get into it. 1. The Great Subsidy Hustle, renting out a nation's workforce. Imagine you are a corporate executive for a multi-billion-dollar global manufacturing firm. You're sitting in a sleek boardroom in Stuttgart, or maybe Shenzhen. You have a massive problem. You need to manufacture your goods cheaply, and you need to sell them to the wealthy European Union market. But you hate EU labour laws. You despise their strict environmental regulations, their powerful worker unions, and their high corporate taxes. You look at a map of Europe searching for a loophole, and right there, nestled in the centre of the Balkans, surrounded by EU member states but critically not a member itself, is the Republic of Serbia. You make a phone call. The Serbian government rolls out the red carpet. They don't just welcome you. They offer you a deal that sounds like it was drafted by a drunken mobster on Christmas Eve. They offer you hundreds of hectares of prime land completely free. They offer to build the access roads and utility infrastructure to your new factory completely free. They offer you a 10-year corporate tax holiday. But wait, it gets better. For every local worker you hire, the Serbian government will hand you a pile of literal cash. We're talking direct non-refundable state subsidies ranging from €10,000 to over €50,000 per job created. It's basically an economic sugar daddy arrangement, except the sugar daddy is a developing Balkan nation, and the spoiled college student is a Fortune 500 multinational conglomerate. Let's look at the absolute strongest defense for this strategy, because the Serbian government didn't just do this out of sheer stupidity. If we rewind to the early 2000s following the catastrophic 1990s wars, the international sanctions, a botched transition to capitalism, and the 2008 global financial crisis, Serbia's economy was on life support. The industrial base from the old Yugoslav era was completely gutted. Youth unemployment was hovering around a terrifying 40 to 50%. The government needed capital, and they needed jobs, any jobs, immediately to prevent a total societal collapse. Offering heavy subsidies to foreign direct investors, FDI, was the only realistic way to jumpstart the engine. And to give credit where it's due, if you only look at the macroeconomic surface data, it worked. By the mid-2020s, FDI inflows hit record highs, consistently pulling in over €4 billion annually. Unemployment plummeted to single digits, GDP grew. The politicians got to stand in front of shiny new factories with giant oversized scissors, cutting ribbons on the evening news. But here's where we strip away the PR hype and look at the brutal mechanics of how this actually functions. When you look at the math, you realise it's not true wealth creation. It's an illusion built on taxpayer debt, since the median net wage for a factory worker in Serbia is roughly €600 to €800 a month. That €10,000 to €50,000 subsidy means the Serbian state is essentially paying your company's entire payroll for the first 3 to 5 years. Where does the state get that money? From the very taxpayers they are saving. The mechanics work like this. The government taxes its citizens, who are already struggling with high inflation, takes that money and hands it to a wealthy foreign corporation. The corporation hires the citizen, pays them a meagre salary using the citizen's own tax money, and then produces goods, like car tires, cables, or textiles. The corporation then exports those goods to Germany or France. Because the goods are exported from Serbian soil, Serbia's gross domestic product, GDP, artificially inflates. Politicians go on TV and say, "Look, our exports are booming, the GDP is rising." But the actual profit, the actual wealth generated from that labour, it instantly leaves the country and goes straight into the bank accounts of executives in Germany, Italy or China. Serbia is left with environmental pollution, a depleted budget, and a workforce stuck in low-value added manual labour. Take the Chinese Linglong tyre factory in the northern Serbian city of Drenjanin. It was heralded as a nearly $1 billion investment. The state gave them nearly 100 hectares of prime agricultural land for free, a plot valued at over €7 million. On top of that, the state granted an estimated €75 million in direct state aid. Meanwhile, as a dark, twisted joke of modern economics, the city of Zrenjanin itself hasn't had safe drinking tap water in over 20 years. Its residents literally cannot drink from their own sinks due to high levels of arsenic in the water supply. Imagine the sheer absurdity. The state can somehow magically find €75 million in cash to give to a multi-billion-dollar foreign tyre conglomerate. But for 2 decades, it hasn't found the funds to build a functioning water treatment plant so its own citizens can brush their teeth without buying bottled water. If you're finding this breakdown eye-opening so far, do me a favour and smash that like button. It tells the algorithm to push real, heavily researched economics instead of mindless internet drama. Furthermore, this subsidy mechanic absolutely crushes domestic Serbian businesses. Imagine you are a bright, ambitious Serbian entrepreneur. You want to open a mid-sized furniture manufacturing plant, or maybe a high-tech agricultural facility. You go to the government for help. Do you get free land? No. Do you get tens of thousands of euros per employee? Absolutely not. You get strangled by notoriously corrupt bureaucracy, you pay full taxes, and you have to compete for labour against foreign giants who are being subsidised by your tax dollars. The data indicates that this model is hitting a massive brick wall. You cannot build a wealthy, modern European nation by wrapping copper cables for €700 a month. It's a demographic death sentence. Smart, educated young Serbs aren't going to stay in towns like Nia or Leskovac to do back-breaking manual labour on an assembly line while the cost of groceries rivals prices in Vienna. They are simply going to pack their bags and move to the EU, and once those foreign subsidies run out, the corporations simply threaten to leave unless the government gives them more money. If the government refuses, the company packs up its machinery and moves to North Macedonia, Bangladesh or Vietnam, leaving behind an empty warehouse and 1,000 unemployed locals. It is a race to the bottom, and unfortunately Serbia bought a front-row ticket. But the exploitation of cheap labour is only half the story. To truly understand the trap Serbia's economy is in, we have to look beneath the soil. We have to talk about the white gold that almost triggered a revolution. 2. The Lithium Roulette, selling the soil to save the state. Picture this. You're standing in the Jadar Valley in western Serbia. It is a lush, vibrant agricultural heartland, stitched together by winding rivers and generational family farms. You've been growing corn and raspberries here your entire life, just like your grandfather did. Then, one day, men in corporate branded hard hats show up with drilling rigs. They tell you they are just doing some geological surveys. What they actually found beneath your soybean fields in 2004 was a completely new, unique mineral. They named it jadarite. And here is a piece of absolutely incredible dark trivia for you. When geologists analysed jadarite, they found its chemical formula is sodium lithium boron silicate hydroxide. If you're a comic book nerd, you might recognise that. That is the exact literal chemical makeup of kryptonite from the movie Superman Returns. And just like kryptonite, this glowing white rock almost completely poisoned the Serbian political system. Within this, jadarite was one of the largest, highest-grade deposits of lithium on the European continent. And by the 2020s, lithium wasn't just a metal, it was the geopolitical holy grail. It is the core ingredient for electric vehicle, EV batteries. Let's look at exactly why the Serbian government and the European Union wanted to dig this up so desperately. For the last decade, Europe has been waking up in a cold sweat over the fact that China absolutely dominates the global EV battery supply chain. The EU desperately needed domestic lithium to ensure its automotive industry, especially the German car manufacturers, wouldn't be entirely at the mercy of Beijing. Enter the Jadar project, backed by the Anglo-Australian mining leviathan, Rio Tinto. The deposit was capable of producing an estimated 58,000 tonnes of battery-grade lithium carbonate annually. That is enough to power roughly 1 million electric vehicles every single year. For the Serbian government, this was their golden ticket. In July 2024, the geopolitical elite descended on Belgrade. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and EU bureaucrats signed a massive strategic partnership with Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. The government's PR machine went into overdrive. They argued this nearly $3 billion megamine would catapult Serbia into the geopolitical big leagues, making them an indispensable ally to the West. They promised thousands of jobs and a massive boost to the national GDP. But as we do on this channel, let's explain the actual mechanics of the deal, rather than just the hype. Because you do not get rich by letting a foreign multinational dig a crater in your backyard. Here is how the economics of foreign-owned mining actually work in a developing nation. When Rio Tinto digs up that lithium, the true, massive profits don't stay in the local economy. The lithium is extracted, processed and shipped out to global battery manufacturers. The billions of dollars in revenue go to shareholders in London, Melbourne and New York. So what does Serbia get? They get mining royalties. And Serbia's mining royalties are notoriously almost comically low, historically hovering around a mere 5% for metallic ores. The math is brutal. The Serbian state would collect a meagre 5% royalty check and get a few thousand temporary construction and mining jobs. In exchange, they would permanently sacrifice prime agricultural land and take on a catastrophic environmental risk. Extracting lithium from jadarite is not like pumping oil. It is a highly toxic process requiring immense amounts of sulfuric acid. Independent Serbian scientists published studies warning of a severe risk that heavy metals like arsenic and boron could leach into the Jadar River, which feeds into the national water supply. You cannot farm raspberries when your irrigation water is highly acidic. The Serbian people looked at this economic equation. A 5% royalty in exchange for the potential toxification of their water table, and they completely lost their minds. In 2021 and 2022, citizens blocked international highways until the government panicked and revoked Rio Tinto's permits. But the state, under immense pressure from the EU, quietly reinstated the project via a court ruling in the summer of 2024. What followed was one of the most remarkable displays of civilian economic resistance in modern European history. Tens of thousands of Serbs flooded the streets of Belgrade in August 2024. This wasn't just a peaceful march with clever signs. They physically occupied the Prokop and Novi Beograd railway stations, completely shutting down international train traffic. They faced off against riot police. Their chant was simple, unified, and terrifyingly absolute. You will not dig here. Quick pause. If you appreciate us digging into the actual math behind these massive geopolitical deals, instead of just repeating cable news talking points, please hit the like button. It helps push this video out to more people who need to hear it. If you listen to mainstream financial media, they will tell you that resistance is futile and that multinational capital always wins. But the data indicates otherwise. In a stunning twist of modern economic history, the people actually won. By November 2025, leaked internal memos confirmed that Rio Tinto's new CEO, Simon Trott, officially halted the flagship project. Facing an unrelenting civilian blockade, mounting regulatory nightmares, and a global lithium market that was seeing depressed prices, the corporate giant finally blinked. They placed the nearly $3 billion project on indefinite care and maintenance. A localized movement of farmers, students, and environmentalists successfully stared down a multi-billion-dollar Western conglomerate, the European Commission, and their own government. While it was a massive victory for environmentalists, it left Serbia's macroeconomic planners sweating bullets. The Golden Age narrative took a massive hit. If you cannot indefinitely subsidize cheap manual labor, and the public absolutely refuses to let you sell off the lithium beneath the soil, how exactly do you build a wealthy 21st century economy? To find the answer, you have to look away from the factories and the mines and look toward the one sector that is quietly, almost secretly, keeping the entire Serbian economy afloat. But as you're about to see, even their biggest success story comes with a massive ticking time bomb. 3. The tech bro Mirage, a digital island in an analog country. Let's step away from the factories and the protests for a minute and head back to the capital. Imagine you're sitting in a ridiculously trendy, minimalist coffee shop in the Vrija neighborhood of Belgrade. You're paying €4 for a flat white that tastes exactly like a flat white in Berlin or Austin, Texas. The table next to you is occupied by 3 guys in their late 20s, aggressively typing on MacBooks and speaking rapid-fire Russian. This cafe represents the crown jewel of the modern Serbian economy, the IT sector. If you want to look at a genuine, verifiable economic miracle in the Balkans, you have to look at Serbian tech. While the agricultural sector struggles with droughts and the manufacturing sector relies on low-wage subsidies, the information and communication technology, ICT sector, has been strapping itself to a rocket ship. A decade ago, tech exports were barely a footnote in the national budget. By 2024, Serbia's ICT exports skyrocketed, blowing past the €3.5 billion mark annually and growing at a staggering rate of 20% year over year. Tech has officially surpassed agriculture and manufacturing as the country's largest net exporter. Prime Minister Ana Brnabić and President Vučić love to brag about this at international summits, framing Serbia as the Silicon Valley of the Balkans. And honestly, we have to apply the anti-propaganda rule here and give credit where it's due. They aren't entirely lying. The talent pool in Serbia is legitimately world-class. The universities in Belgrade, Novi Sad and Niš pump out phenomenal engineers, mathematicians and developers. But then, in 2022, a geopolitical earthquake hit, and it poured lighter fluid on the already booming tech fire. When the war in Ukraine broke out and Western sanctions slammed into the Russian economy, hundreds of thousands of Russians fled. And because Serbia famously refused to sanction Moscow and maintain direct flights to Russia, it became the ultimate safe haven. Between 50,000 and 100,000 Russians flooded into Serbia. But these weren't just any refugees. This was a massive brain drain of Russia's elite tech class. A playful new term even emerged in the local vernacular, aitishniki, a mashup of the English IT and a Russian suffix, used to describe these incoming tech bros. Global tech giants that were operating in Russia instantly relocated to Serbia to avoid sanctions. Yandex, often referred to as the Russian Google, set up a massive hub in Belgrade with hundreds of employees. Luxoft, a company that builds AI for BMW, moved roughly 1,000 engineers to the country. Wargaming, the massive video game developer, shifted operations to the Balkans. The Serbian government saw this golden goose and immediately offered insane tax incentives. If you relocated your tech company to Serbia and hired these newly settled persons, the government would grant you up to a 70% deduction on payroll taxes and social contributions. On paper, it looks like a flawless victory. The GDP goes up, the export numbers look beautiful, and Belgrade looks like a cosmopolitan tech hub. So what is the problem? Why is this a mirage? Because when you look at the mechanics of this boom, you realize it is creating 2 completely different, entirely isolated Serbias. Let's look at the numbers. The median net salary in Serbia, meaning the actual amount of money the average working-class citizen takes home, hovers around €600 to €800 a month. Meanwhile, a mid to senior level IT developer in Belgrade or Novi Sad is easily pulling in €2,500 to €4,000 plus a month. When you inject tens of thousands of highly paid tech workers, both domestic and Russian, expats, into a developing economy, you trigger localized hyperinflation. Real estate prices in Belgrade and Novi Sad absolutely exploded. Landlords realized they could kick out local Serbian families paying €400 a month in rent and lease the exact same apartment to a Russian software engineer for €1,000 a month. You now have a situation where a Serbian nurse, or a public school teacher, literally cannot afford to live in their own capital city. The tech sector has essentially created a walled digital garden. The wealth generated by these IT exports does not trickle down to the rural farmer in the south or the factory worker in the east. It stays trapped in the hands of the urban elite, the real estate developers, and the cafe owners who charge €4 for a flat white. Let me know in the comments, do you think massive tech migrations help or hurt developing countries? The wealth inequality debate is fascinating and I want to hear your take. But the real ticking time bomb isn't just inequality, it is the fragility of the entire model. Despite the influx of Russian product companies like Yandex, the vast majority of the domestic Serbian IT sector operates on an outsourcing or body leasing model. This means Serbian companies don't usually own the intellectual property, IP, they create. They are essentially renting out their developers' brains to American, British and Swiss corporations for a fraction of what a developer in San Francisco would cost. Serbia isn't getting rich by inventing the next Facebook or the next ChatGPT. They are getting rich by doing the back-end maintenance for an insurance company in Ohio. And remember, those massive 70% tax breaks the government promised to keep all these foreign tech companies in the country. Well, governments in developing nations are notoriously unpredictable. By late 2024 and early 2025, the Serbian state, facing its own budget constraints, quietly began to abolish some of these tax incentives. The state owed millions of euros in unpaid benefits to the IT sector. The corporate reaction was instantaneous and ruthless. According to the Serbian IT Association, multiple massive tech corporations immediately threatened to pack up their laptops and move to Bulgaria, Romania or Poland. This is the brutal reality of relying on transient globalized tech capital. The Atishniki and the multinational corporations hold zero loyalty to the Serbian flag. They are there because the taxes are low, the internet's fast and the government stays out of their way. The absolute second those financial incentives dry up, or the geopolitical winds shift, they will leave. Serbia has essentially built $1 billion digital penthouse on top of a crumbling analog foundation. But as precarious as the tech and manufacturing sectors are, they pale in comparison to the real engine of survival for the average Serbian citizen. To understand how the people actually survive, the inflation, the corruption, and the low wages, we have to talk about the most powerful invisible economic force in the Balkans. We have to talk about the diaspora. 4. The diaspora, the invisible safety net. Imagine you're driving through eastern Serbia, let's say around the rural municipality of Negotin. You're cruising down a 2-lane road, passing through villages that look almost surreal, like something out of a bizarre architectural fever dream. You see massive 4-story mansions with ornate wrought-iron gates, marble statues of lions guarding the driveways, and perfectly manicured lawns. But as you drive slower, you notice something eerie. Every single window has the heavy metal blinds drawn shut. There are no cars in the driveways. The streets are completely, deafeningly silent. It feels like a ghost town built for millionaires. You roll down your window and ask an elderly woman walking by where everyone is. She'll look at you, gesture vaguely to the west, and give you a one-word answer. Nemachka, Germany. Or maybe Austria or Schweikarska. Welcome to the true hidden engine of the Serbian economy. It's not lithium. It's not foreign tyre factories. It's the millions of Serbs who don't even live in Serbia. To understand how the average Serbian family actually survives the mathematical paradox of low Balkan wages and European-level grocery prices, you have to look at the macroeconomic power of the diaspora and the mechanics of remittances. In recent years, personal remittances sent back to Serbia consistently hit between $5 billion and nearly $6 billion annually. To put that into perspective, that is roughly 6.5% to 7.6% of the country's entire gross domestic product, GDP. That means the single greatest financial safety net keeping the Serbian economy from completely flatlining isn't a brilliant government policy. It's a 35-year-old nurse working a grueling double shift in a hospital in Munich, sending €500 a month via Western Union back to her retired parents in Kragujevac so they can afford winter heating and blood pressure medication. The absolute strongest defense for this system is that labour mobility is a fundamental right, and remittances act as an incredible, decentralised, hyper-efficient welfare system. Without this massive inflow of foreign cash, domestic consumption in Serbia would crater overnight. People wouldn't buy new appliances, they wouldn't renovate their homes, and local businesses would shut down. In a twisted, dark humour sort of way, exporting your citizens to wealthier nations is a highly effective way to stabilise your currency and keep domestic households afloat. Some economists even reframe this positively as brain circulation, rather than brain drain, arguing that these expats gain advanced skills and capital abroad, which they might one day return to invest in their homeland. But when you strip away the optimistic economic theory and look at the brutal demographic realities on the ground, the math becomes absolutely terrifying. Serbia is currently experiencing what locals and sociologists refer to as the silent exodus. The data indicates that the country is not just losing temporary manual labourers looking for seasonal work, it is hemorrhaging its best, brightest and youngest. We're talking about doctors, electrical engineers, IT specialists and researchers. A report utilising OECD data projected that Serbia loses around $9 billion in direct economic potential due to brain drain in the science, technology and innovation sectors alone. Let me explain the mechanics of why that number is so high. The Serbian state pays to educate these young professionals through heavily subsidised public schooling and tuition-free state universities. It takes decades and immense public funding to create a skilled surgeon or engineer. Then, the absolute second they graduate, they pack their bags and move to Berlin. Serbia is essentially taking its scarce tax dollars to subsidise the German and Austrian labour markets entirely for free. The mechanics of this demographic crisis create a brutally effective, compounding negative feedback loop. Young, educated people look at the sticky inflation, the nepotism in state institutions, and the low wages, and they emigrate. Because the youth emigrate, the domestic workforce shrinks. Because the workforce shrinks, the government has to collect higher taxes from a smaller pool of remaining workers to pay for an increasingly massive pool of pensioners. Because taxes and living costs go up, even more young people decide to leave. If you want to see what a demographic time bomb looks like, you don't need to look at dystopian fiction, just look at Serbia's population pyramid. In 1990, Serbia's population was around 7.5 million. By the mid-2020s, it dropped to roughly 6.6 million. Current trends and projections from the Statistical Office of the Republic of Serbia suggest that by 2052, the population could plummet to 5.2 million. That is a projected loss of 1.4 million people, nearly 20% of the entire country in just a few decades. And it's not just that the population is shrinking, it's aging at an unprecedented rate. The median age in Serbia is currently pushing past 45 years old, making it one of the oldest and fastest aging societies on planet Earth. The birth rate is sitting at roughly 1.5 to 1.6 children per woman, which is well below the 2.1 replacement rate needed just to keep the population stable. This creates an absolute mathematical nightmare for the national pension system, the PIO fund. State pension systems function, mechanically speaking, somewhat like a legally mandated generational transfer. In a healthy, growing economy, you generally want 3 or 4 active workers paying taxes to support one retiree. In Serbia, that ratio is creeping dangerously close to a 1-to-1 ratio. You have one worker sweating in a factory or an IT office to support one pensioner. It is mathematically unsustainable in the long run without massive government borrowing. Quick interjection. If you are finding this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of demographics and economics valuable, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We rely on viewers like you, not corporate sponsors, to keep this level of objective research going. So the Serbian government is stuck in an impossible, tragic trap. They actively rely on the billions of euros that the diaspora sends home to keep the current economy from sinking. But the very act of the diaspora leaving ensures that the future economy has no foundation to build upon. It is an economy that is literally eating its own seed corn just to survive the winter. Politicians can boast about historically low unemployment rates all they want, but it's mathematically very easy to lower your unemployment rate when your unemployed youth are actively boarding one-way flights to Frankfurt. This leads us to a massive, glaring question. If the domestic manufacturing base relies on state subsidies, the tech sector is an isolated bubble, and the general population is relying on Western Union transfers to survive. Who exactly is owning and building all of this shiny new infrastructure in Belgrade? Who is paying for the new massive highways, the high-speed railways, and the multi-billion-dollar EXPO 2027 project? To find that answer, we have to look to the east. we have to talk about the new Silk Road and how Serbia willingly became the ultimate European laboratory for Chinese debt trap diplomacy. 5. The Dragon's Backyard, high-speed trains and high-stakes debt. Imagine you're driving out of Belgrade on the newly minted Miloš Veliki highway, or perhaps you're sitting in the first-class cabin of the shiny new Soko Falcon high-speed train, effortlessly gliding toward the Hungarian border at 200 kilometers per hour. Outside your window, you see massive construction sites rising from the dirt. You're witnessing the physical manifestation of the government's crown jewel, the Leap into the Future development plan, centered around hosting the specialized EXPO 2027. The government is promising a futuristic overhaul of the entire country. We are talking about brand new national stadiums, sweeping residential complexes, automated metro lines, and a modernized grid. The estimated price tag for this massive multi-year national facelift, a staggering €17 billion to €18 billion. But if you've been paying attention to the math in the previous chapters, a glaring, multi-billion-dollar question should be flashing in your mind. If the state is subsidizing foreign factories with taxpayer cash, the tech wealth is isolated, and the youth are moving to Germany, how on earth is a developing Balkan nation with a GDP of roughly €75 billion paying for all of this? Where do you get that kind of cash? You look east. You look to Beijing. If you are the Serbian president, and you desperately need to modernize your country's crumbling post-Yugoslav infrastructure to stimulate economic growth, you have two choices. Choice A, you go to the European Union or the World Bank. They will offer you loans with fantastic low interest rates, but the catch is brutal. The EU demands years of rigorous environmental impact studies. They demand strict, transparent public procurement bidding processes. They demand labour rights guarantees. By the time the EU finally approves the funds to build a single bridge, you might have already lost your next two election cycles. Choice B, you go to China. Specifically, you go to the state-owned Export-Import Exim Bank of China and join their global Belt and Road Initiative. China does not care about your environmental studies. China does not care about transparent public bidding. In fact, thanks to a deeply controversial interstate agreement signed years ago, Chinese infrastructure projects in Serbia are legally exempt from public procurement laws entirely. China simply shows up with a blank check, an army of engineers, and a fleet of bulldozers. For politicians who need to cut ribbons and show tangible progress to their voters before the next election cycle, choice B is absolutely irresistible. President Vučić has openly referred to China as an iron friend and recently signed a sweeping free trade agreement with Beijing, the first of its kind in Central and Eastern Europe. But as always, we're here to explain the mechanics, not the political hype. Let's break down exactly how a Chinese bilateral infrastructure loan actually works, because it is a masterpiece of geopolitical financial engineering. When Serbia borrows $1 billion from China's Exim Bank to build a new highway, that $1 billion never actually enters the Serbian banking system. It never touches the local economy. Instead, the money is transferred directly from the Chinese state bank to a Chinese state-owned enterprise, like the China Road and Bridge Corporation, CRBC, or Shandong High Speed. That Chinese company then ships over its own heavy machinery, its own steel, and very often its own Chinese labour force. So mechanically speaking, China is just paying itself to keep its own massive state-owned construction companies employed, while simultaneously exporting its excess industrial capacity, like steel and concrete, to Europe. What does Serbia get? Serbia gets the physical highway, the political photo op, and a massive 20-year debt obligation denominated in a foreign currency, with interest rates that are typically higher than what European institutions would charge. According to recent data from the National Bank of Serbia and international financial monitors, Serbia's debt to China has reached roughly €3.7 billion. To put that into perspective, that is a 12-fold increase in just a single decade. Chinese loans now account for over 8% of Serbia's total external debt. Now, proponents of this model will argue that this is highly manageable. They will point out that Serbia's overall debt to GDP ratio is hovering comfortably around the 50% mark, which is incredibly healthy, especially compared to Western European nations like Italy or Greece, whose debt loads are well over 100% of their GDP. Serbia is not currently in a debt crisis, but the danger lies in the opacity and the trajectory. Many of these Chinese contracts are classified as state secrets. The public literally does not know what collateral the government has pledged in the event of a default. And in the world of sovereign debt, collateral is everything. If you want to see the dark, terrifying timeline of what happens when a small Balkan nation miscalculates this exact economic model, you just have to look a few hours south, across the border to Montenegro. A few years ago, Montenegro took out a nearly $1 billion loan from China's Exim Bank to build the Bar-Boljar Highway, a project quickly dubbed the Highway to Nowhere. The loan was so massive it caused Montenegro's debt to skyrocket to catastrophic levels, threatening to bankrupt the entire country. The terms of the contract, which eventually leaked, revealed a terrifying clause. If Montenegro defaulted on the loan, China legally had the right to seize physical Montenegrin state assets, including land and infrastructure. Ultimately, Montenegro had to frantically beg Western banks and the EU for a massive financial hedging arrangement, just to save themselves from a sovereign default and potential asset seizure. Serbia's economy is vastly larger and more diversified than Montenegro's, so a sudden collapse is highly unlikely. However, the sheer volume of capital required to pull off EXPO 2027 means the government is doubling down on this debt-fueled growth model. They are betting the house that the new highways and high-speed rail lines will generate enough future economic activity to eventually pay off the loans. But here is the ultimate irony of the dragon's backyard strategy. Serbia is using Chinese money and Chinese labour to build the infrastructure required to integrate more closely with the European Union market. They are playing the world's two biggest economic superpowers against each other, taking the cash from Beijing while exporting the goods to Berlin. It is a brilliant high-wire balancing act, but as any acrobat will tell you, the longer you stay on the tightrope, the higher the probability that a single gust of wind, like a global recession or a spike in global borrowing costs, will send you plummeting. And if that happens, the people left holding the bag won't be the politicians cutting the ribbons at EXPO 2027. It will be the shrinking, aging tax base we talked about in the last chapter. But infrastructure and debt aren't the only things tying Serbia's fate to foreign powers. To truly grasp the geopolitical tightrope this economy is walking, we have to talk about the one resource that literally keeps the lights on, the heat running, and the factories humming. We have to talk about the Russian bear in the room. 6. The Russian bear in the room, the energy chokehold. Imagine it's late November 2025. You are the CEO of a major logistics company in Belgrade, or perhaps you just manage a local fleet of delivery vans. You wake up, turn on the morning news, and your blood runs cold. The headlines are screaming that the nation's only oil refinery, the massive facility in Pančevo that supplies up to 90% of the country's fuel, is days away from completely running out of crude oil. You aren't at war. There is no natural disaster. Your economy has been brought to the absolute brink of paralysis by a group of accountants and compliance officers sitting in an office building in Washington, D.C. To understand how the Serbian economy almost froze to death in the winter of 2025 and how it completely fundamentally changed in early 2026, we have to talk about the Russian bear in the room. We have to talk about energy. Let's rewind to the original sin of the modern Serbian energy sector. The year is 2008. The Serbian government does something that to a Western economist looks like absolute financial suicide. They sell 51% of their state-owned oil and gas monopoly, Naftna Industrija Serbije, NES, to Russia's state-owned energy giant Gazprom Neft. The price tag, a measly €400 million. To put into perspective how absurdly low that is, the Serbian State Audit Institution at the time estimated the real, actual value of NIS was closer to €2 billion. Serbia effectively handed over the keys to its entire energy infrastructure to Moscow at an 80% discount. Why on earth would the Serbian leadership agree to this? They weren't stupid. In 2008, Serbia was reeling from the Western-backed declaration of independence by Kosovo. They desperately needed a powerful ally with veto power on the UN Security Council. Furthermore, the Russians promised to build the massive South Stream gas pipeline directly through Serbia, which would have guaranteed cheap energy and lucrative transit. Fees for decades. They traded an economic asset for a geopolitical shield. Mechanically speaking, it locked Serbia into an energy architecture heavily subsidized by cheap Russian hydrocarbons. Those foreign factories we talked about in Chapter 1? They are only profitable because the energy powering their assembly lines was cheap. But fast forward to the fallout of the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, and this geopolitical shield morphed into an economic straitjacket. By the mid-2020s, the European Union and the United States were aggressively hunting down Russian energy assets globally. But because Serbia desperately relied on Gazprom-owned NAS for almost all of its fuel, and imported roughly 3 billion cubic meters of natural gas a year almost exclusively from Russia, Belgrade refused to sanction Moscow. They tried to maintain a stance of military neutrality. But the mechanics of global finance do not care about your neutrality. In late 2025, the trap completely sprang shut. The United States Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, dropped the hammer, and their sanctions against Russian energy entities officially hit NERS. Let me explain the brutal mechanics of how modern sanctions work. The US didn't bomb the refinery. They didn't blockade the borders. They simply used their control of the global financial system. Because NIS was majority-owned by Gazprom, international banks refused to process their payments. More importantly, the Croatian pipeline, JANAF, which physically transported crude oil from the Adriatic Sea into landlocked Serbia, legally had to shut off the valves. Overnight, the country that provided up to 90% of Serbia's fuel was cut off from the world. The Serbian government panicked. They tried a corporate shell game in September 2025, having Gazprom transfer about 11% of its shares to a little-known firm in St. Petersburg to technically bring the Russian ownership below the 50% threshold. The US Treasury looked at that, laughed, and enforced the sanctions anyway. Energy, as the politicians quickly learned, knows no compromise. You are either in the Western financial system or you are out. What happened next was one of the most humiliating and dramatic forced corporate buyouts in modern Balkan history. Facing an absolute collapse of the transportation and manufacturing sectors, the Serbian government and their Russian partners had no choice but to surrender. By January 2026, news broke that Gazprom had agreed in principle to sell its controlling stake in NIS to Hungary's MOL group. To keep the fuel flowing while the lawyers drafted the paperwork, the US Treasury had to issue temporary month-to-month waivers, just so Serbia wouldn't run out of gasoline. Think about the geopolitical reality of that. A sovereign European nation, in early 2026, was relying on a monthly permission slip from Washington, D.C., just to keep its delivery trucks running and its citizens' homes heated. And what about natural gas? If you listen to the government PR, they will proudly tell you that they are diversifying. In late 2023, they inaugurated a 170-kilometre gas interconnector with Bulgaria, capable of importing 1.8 billion cubic meters of non-Russian gas from places like Azerbaijan. But the data indicates that diversification is agonizingly slow. While the interconnector exists, securing the actual gas volumes from a highly competitive global market is a different story. As of early 2026, Serbia's state gas company, Srbijagas, was completely failing to secure a new long-term contract with Russia. Instead, they are surviving on incredibly stressful short-term 3 to 6 month extension annexes. They're essentially living paycheck to paycheck on a national energy scale. If you are fascinated by how geopolitical leverage actually works in the real world, drop a comment below. Does economic sanctioning go too far when it threatens civilian infrastructure, or is it the only effective tool the West has left? The Russian bear might be slowly getting pushed out of the Serbian ownership structure, but the psychological and economic scars of that reliance will last for a generation. Serbia learned the hard way that when you sell your energy sovereignty for cheap, you eventually pay for it with your national security. But energy is just the fuel for the economy. To truly understand where Serbia's money goes, we need to look at the people pulling the levers of power. We need to talk about the absolute most controversial aspect of the Serbian economy, the overlap between the state, the construction cartels, and the ruling political party. 7. The concrete cartels and the party state. Imagine you're a bright, ambitious young professional. Let's say you have a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. You're smart, you understand the mechanics of how complex systems work, and you even spent time abroad completing the elite program for leadership development at Harvard Business School. You decide to bring that world-class expertise back to Serbia to help modernize a massive state-owned enterprise, perhaps the National Electric Grid, EPS, or a regional infrastructure department. You submit your flawless resume, you nail the interview, but when the hiring decision is announced, you lose the job. The guy who gets it, He barely managed to graduate from a highly questionable, unaccredited local private college. But what he lacks in engineering mechanics or business acumen, he makes up for with one undeniable, hyper-valuable skill. He is incredibly efficient at organising fleets of buses to transport citizens to political rallies for the ruling party. Welcome to the most controversial, deeply ingrained and mathematically devastating mechanic of the Serbian economy, partokratia, the party state. If you want to understand where the billions of euros in foreign loans, tax revenues and state subsidies actually end up, you have to understand that the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, SNS, is not just a political organisation. It is the single largest employment agency and corporate cartel in the Balkans. The SNS boasts a reported membership of over 700,000 people. In a country with a shrinking population of roughly 6.6 million, that means more than 10% of the entire nation carries a party card. To put that into perspective, the ruling party in Serbia has a higher per capita membership rate than the Chinese Communist Party does in China. Why would an economy operate this way? The strongest defense of managed state capitalism is efficiency. In a post-war, transitional economy, democratic bureaucracy is notoriously slow. Getting permits, conducting transparent environmental reviews, and managing local gridlock takes years. The ruling party argues that by centralising absolute control, they can execute mega projects at lightning speed. They look at the skyline of Belgrade, filled with new skyscrapers, and argue that without the party's iron grip, nothing would ever get built. But let's tear down the hype and look at the actual financial mechanics of how this efficiency works in reality. It all revolves around a concept called the public procurement loop. When the state decides to build a massive project, like the €250 million National Stadium for EXPO 2027, or a sweeping new highway, they don't want pesky European transparency laws slowing them down. So the government frequently passes what is called a lex specialis, a special law. This legal loophole allows the state to completely bypass standard competitive public bidding. Instead of 10 companies fighting to offer the best price and highest quality, the government handpicks a pre-approved consortium. These construction firms are almost universally tied to powerful oligarchs loyal to the ruling party. The state awards them the contract at massively inflated prices. The consortium builds the road, and the excess profit margins are quietly funneled back into the political machine, funding campaigns, buying out local media stations, or getting parked in offshore accounts. This leads directly to a bizarre economic anomaly that confuses every Western expat who visits Belgrade. Remember those skyrocketing real estate prices we talked about in the IT chapter? It wasn't just Russian tech bros driving up the cost of a one-bedroom apartment to €3,000 per square metre. It is the domestic construction cartels. When oligarchs and party officials extract massive amounts of untaxed cash from inflated public contracts, they can't exactly deposit it into a heavily regulated European bank. They need to launder it, and the absolute best way to wash illicit cash in the Balkans is to pour it into concrete. Belgrade has essentially transformed into the Dubai of Eastern Europe, a massive, sprawling safe deposit box made of luxury high-rises, heavily fueled by cash transactions that bypass the standard mortgage market. Let me know in the comments. Do you think state-managed capitalism can ever actually work without ending in massive corruption, or is human greed always going to crash the system? But here is the dark, inevitable tragedy of the partokratia model. When you replace competent mechanical engineers, seasoned architects, and strict safety inspectors with loyal political operatives, the laws of physics eventually catch up with you. You cannot bribe gravity. In November 2024, the dark reality of this system shattered the country. The government had just proudly completed the reconstruction of the central railway station in Novi Sad. It was a crown jewel of their infrastructure push, heavily tied to foreign loans and state-approved contractors. But because the system prioritizes speed and political loyalty over transparent engineering oversight, the project was riddled with secret annexes and bypassed safety protocols. On a busy Friday, the massive concrete canopy of the station suffered a catastrophic structural failure. It collapsed directly onto the pavement below, crushing and killing 15 people and permanently disabling several others. The resulting public outrage wasn't just about a poorly built roof. It was the collective, horrifying realization by the Serbian public that the corruption was no longer just stealing their tax dollars. It was literally falling on their heads. Subsequent investigations revealed a labyrinth of shielded subcontractors and a glaring absence of proper use permits. But because the party controls the judiciary and the police just as tightly as they control the construction cartels, holding high-level decision-makers accountable became an agonizingly slow, politically manipulated process. This is the ultimate cost of the party state. It creates an economy where loyalty is the only currency that matters, and competence is viewed as a political threat. But while the urban centres are pouring billions into concrete and dodging accountability, what is happening to the vast rural heartland of the country? To understand the final fatal crack in the foundation of Serbia's economy, we have to look away from the skyscrapers and look at the dirt. We need to talk about the death of the Serbian farmer. 8. The death of the farmer, squeezing the breadbasket. Imagine you are standing in the middle of Vojvodina, the northern province of Serbia. It is a stunning, endless, perfectly flat expanse of some of the richest, most fertile black soil on the entire European continent. For centuries, this region has been rightfully called the breadbasket of the Balkans. Historically, it produced enough wheat, corn and soy to feed the entirety of the former Yugoslavia, with plenty left over for export. But if you look closely at the farmer driving the tractor toward you, the illusion of agricultural supremacy starts to crack. He is highly likely to be in his mid to late 60s. And that tractor, it isn't a modern GPS-guided John Deere. It is a rusty, belching IMT model that was probably manufactured in a state-owned factory before the Berlin Wall came down. While the politicians in Belgrade are busy handing out €75 million subsidies to Chinese tyre factories and rolling out the red carpet, for Russian tech bros, the absolute traditional bedrock of the Serbian economy, the domestic farmer, is being systematically starved out of existence. To understand why the Serbian agricultural sector is collapsing, we have to look at the brutal, inescapable mechanics of globalized farming. When a Serbian farmer plants a hectare of wheat, he doesn't just sell it to his local village, he sells it on the open, highly competitive European market. But here is the massive structural disadvantage. He's competing directly against farmers in neighbouring EU countries like Hungary, Romania and France. Those EU farmers are protected by the Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, a massive multi-billion euro financial shield provided by Brussels. The EU throws incredibly generous subsidies at its farmers to guarantee their profit margins and keep food prices stable. The Serbian farmer sitting outside the EU gets no such shield. Instead, he is entirely dependent on the domestic Serbian budget. And historically, the Serbian state has treated its farmers less like an essential food security asset and more like an ATM. Why would a government neglect its own food producers? From a purely macroeconomic, ruthless GDP growth perspective, agriculture is a frustrating sector. It is incredibly vulnerable to weather. It yields relatively low profit margins compared to tech, and it doesn't generate the massive, flashy foreign currency inflows that IT exports or lithium mining do. If you are a finance minister trying to rapidly modernize a post-war economy, you might logically calculate that state funds are better spent building a high-speed rail line to Budapest, rather than buying new tractors for a dying village in the north. But when you ignore the base of your supply chain, the math eventually breaks. And in Serbia, it broke via the fuel pump. For years, the Serbian government imposed staggering excise taxes on agricultural diesel fuel. While farmers in the EU were buying heavily subsidised, tax-exempt red diesel to run their machinery, the Serbian farmer was paying some of the highest fuel prices in the entire region just to plough his own field. The state was effectively taxing the very act of growing food. Add to this the absolute failure of state infrastructure. Serbia is geographically blessed, crisscrossed by massive waterways like the Danube and the Sava rivers. Yet, despite this abundance of water, the data indicates that an abysmal fraction of Serbia's arable land, historically hovering around a mere 3% to 5%, is equipped with functioning irrigation systems. So, what happens when climate change turns up the thermostat? In the summers of 2022, 2023 and 2024, the Balkans were hit with catastrophic scorching droughts. Because there was no irrigation infrastructure, the crops simply burned in the dirt. Yields for staple exports like corn and soybeans plummeted. The economic equation for the average Serbian farming family became mathematically impossible. The cost of seed, high-tax diesel, and European-priced fertilizer absolutely eclipsed the revenue they could generate from a drought-ruined harvest. The state subsidies they were promised were often minuscule, wrapped in notorious bureaucratic red tape, and frequently delayed by months. Let me know in the comments. Have you noticed the price of basic groceries skyrocketing in your own country recently? How is your government handling agricultural support? By mid-2023 and continuing into 2024, the farmers realised that lobbying politicians in suits wasn't working. So, they resorted to the only leverage they had left. Thousands of farmers drove their heavy machinery out of the fields and directly onto the national highways. They physically blockaded toll booths, bridges and city centres in Novi Sad and beyond. It was a massive, desperate display of economic civil disobedience. The government, panicked by the optical disaster of blockaded roads, would temporarily cave, promising higher subsidies and cheaper fuel to get the tractors off the highway. But inflation quickly ate up whatever meagre gains were negotiated, and this leads us to the dark, highly lucrative final stage of the agricultural squeeze: corporate consolidation. When a family farm goes bankrupt because the math no longer works, that incredibly fertile soil doesn't just disappear. It gets bought up for pennies on the dollar by domestic oligarchs and massive foreign conglomerates who possess the capital to survive the droughts. Look no further than the fate of PKB, Poljoprivredni Kombinat Beograd. During the Yugoslav era, PKB was an absolute titan, one of the largest and most productive state-owned agricultural combines in all of Europe, effectively feeding the entire capital city of Belgrade. But after years of mismanagement and debt accumulation, the state decided to sell it off. In 2018, the core assets of this massive strategic national food producer, including roughly 17,000 hectares of prime suburban farmland, were sold to Aldara, a multinational agribusiness conglomerate based in the United Arab Emirates. The price tag was roughly €105 million, a number that many local economists argued was a severe undervaluation of the land alone. This is the ultimate tragic feedback loop of the Serbian economy. The government essentially decides that funding a shiny new football stadium or subsidising a foreign tyre factory is a better return on investment than ensuring its own people have the margins to grow food. The smallholder farmer goes bankrupt, sells his generational land to a massive agro-corporation, and then faces a grim choice. He either moves to Belgrade to become a low-wage security guard for a shiny new foreign-owned factory, or he packs his bags and joins the Diaspora in Germany. The fields of Vojvodina remain green, but the wealth generated from that soil is increasingly loaded onto trucks and shipped out of the country, leaving behind aging, dying villages. We have covered the factories, the mines, the tech bros, the missing youth, the Chinese debt, the Russian energy trap, the concrete cartels, and now the death of the farmer. Next, we are going to pull all of these massive, chaotic economic mechanics together into one final conclusion to answer the ultimate question. Is Serbia's golden age a masterstroke of geopolitical hustling, or is it a house of cards waiting for the wind to blow? 9. Final thoughts. The ultimate geopolitical poker game. So let's bring this all the way back to where we started. You're sitting at that trendy cafe on Knez Mihailova. The Russian tech bro at the next table is finishing his €4 flat white. The drone overhead is mapping out a new Chinese-funded highway, and somewhere down south, a German factory is churning out car parts subsidised entirely by the Serbian taxpayer. Is Serbia actually in a golden age? If you look strictly at the nominal GDP growth, the historically low official unemployment rate, and the shiny new skylines in Belgrade, you could easily make that argument. The policymakers of the 2000s inherited a completely broken, sanctioned post-war economy that had been financially strip-mined during the 1990s. They had a terrible hand of cards, and they had to play a brutal game of geopolitical survival. They successfully leveraged their unique neutral geography to extract development funds from the EU, blank check, infrastructure loans from China, and, until the sanctions hit, dirt-cheap energy from Russia. Mechanically speaking, playing the world's superpowers against each other to build your domestic infrastructure takes a certain level of ruthless Machiavellian brilliance. But when you strip away the EXPO 2027 PR campaigns and look at the actual mechanics beneath the hood, the data indicates a highly fragile, completely outsourced system. It is a mathematical impossibility to build a sustainable sovereign economy when your primary, most reliable export is your own educated youth. You cannot build generational national wealth when your economic strategy revolves around paying foreign megacorporations to exploit your cheap manual labour, and you certainly cannot ensure national security when you rely on foreign state-owned banks to build your roads and foreign monopolies to heat your citizens' homes. Serbia has effectively turned its economy into a massive multinational franchise operation. The storefront looks incredibly modern, the marketing is world-class, and the cash register is ringing. But the harsh truth is that the locals don't own the building, they don't own the intellectual property, and they are increasingly struggling to afford the rent. It's like building a luxurious penthouse suite on a foundation made of Chinese IOU notes, imported fuel, and aging tractors. Current demographic and economic trends strongly suggest that, unless there is a radical, immediate shift towards supporting domestic innovation, establishing transparent legal institutions, and saving the agricultural base, this leap into the future might just be a high-speed rail ride into a heavily indebted demographic winter. The brutal math of a shrinking, rapidly aging population trying to financially support a massive party-controlled state apparatus simply does not compute in the long run. The ultimate irony of the modern Serbian economy is that in its desperate bid to avoid being controlled by the West or the East, it slowly sold off its equity to both of them. But hey, at least the new trains are fast, right? If you want to understand the mechanics of another massive geopolitical flashpoint and how global trade can be choked off overnight, check out our deep dive on the Strait of Hormuz. You should see a link to that video in the description. Don't forget to hit subscribe, drop a like to feed the algorithm, and let me know in the comments below. Who do you think is actually winning the economic war in the Balkans? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.